Hey guys, today starts a small series where I'm going to be talking about the second subclasses in depth, kind of like what I did with my alpha PvE comparison video. I ended up writing so much for each class that I've decided to split each subclass into its own video, go over all the skills and the talents in depth, and then hopefully do a big PvE comparison video between all 6 subclasses to cap it off, where I'll talk about possible builds for both solo and group play. Today, we're going to be covering the Sunsinger. Obviously, since we didn't even get to use these subclasses, everything that I'm going to be talking about is pretty much based on the tooltips alone and a couple of really short clips that I was able to find here and there. The Sunsinger is a solar damaged based subclass. We'll start with grenades. They are Solar Grenade, Firebolt Grenade, and Fusion Grenade. If Solar Grenade is anything like Vortex Grenade, it'll be really good in both PvE and PvP. Firebolt sounds a lot like the Hunter's Swarm Grenade, which is pretty good for zoning, but sounds not as good as Solar Grenade. Fusion Grenade will only be as good as your ability to aim it. If it ends up being a one-hit kill in PvP, I see it being very powerful, but if it's not a one-hit kill, I'd probably pass. PvE, anything with a fire shield will probably instantly lose that shield, but I still think Solar Grenade just might end up being better, especially considering it seems like the damage will tick like Vortex Grenade, and that's really fast. The movement options for Sunsinger are basically the same as Void Caller, except replace Blink with Balance Glide, which I think will probably end up being the best option. I personally really like a balance, but this is really the player's choice. Next up, we have Radiance. Radiance's tooltip right now is basically increases the effectiveness of all your abilities. Now in the past we've heard that Radiance was going to be a fire team buff, maybe increasing damage or a couple of other things. This does not appear to be the case anymore. This subclass actually has very good damage and is a pretty good solo subclass. Increases the effectiveness of all your abilities means you gained reduced cooldowns on all of your skills. If we check this clip here, you can see the melee ability timer going up really fast while Radiance is active. Not to mention we see Fireborn in action as well. I'll talk about that next. One of the upgrades is Song of Flame, which is indeed a fire team buff. It reduces all the cooldowns for nearby allies, and I guarantee this is the skill that you will be using if you are a Sunsinger in a raid, and it should be the one that you use if you're with any other people ever. The next 2 skills are Radiant Skin and Fireborn. Radiant Skin gives you damage reduction while active, and Fireborn makes it so you can self-resurrect upon activation. I can see Fireborn getting some use in team play as an absolute panic button when things go wrong. Solo play, you'll probably want Radiant Skin, as dying is really not the worst thing in the world when you're alone, so I feel like Fireborn really loses a lot of its effectiveness. I don't know if there's a maximum range on Song of Flame, so for PvP, if there is no max range and it just automatically applies to everyone, I would go Song of Flame, but I honestly don't think it's going to do that, so Radiant Skin is probably going to be your best bet. Like I said, I can see Fireborn getting some use to surprise your enemies, but I'd rather be proactive than reactive. Scorch is your melee, where you deal damage up front and then additional damage over time. Upgrades include Flame Shield, Solar Wind, and Brimstone. Flame Shield grants reduced damage taken when you kill with Scorch, Solar Wind knocks back enemies when they're hit with Scorch, and Brimstone makes enemies explode when they're killed by Scorch. I can see Solar Wind getting a lot of use in PvE for getting enemies out of your face, especially those stealth melee vandals. I'm not a huge fan of anything that requires a kill to activate, and I say that fully knowing that I've suggested stuff like Illuminated Stormfist and Transfusion, but Solar Wind just seems better than the other options, whereas Illuminated and Transfusions were probably among the best in the tree. However, I can definitely see those skills, the skills where you need to kill to activate the bonus, being useful once we get more comfortable with the game, at least when I get more comfortable. My brain tends to think that I'm always going to be meleeing something like a Fallen Captain or just something that's going to slap me back for massive damage, and that's totally not the case. There's tons of lesser enemies to kill. With Brimstone, anything that makes your enemies explode just seems too situational to ever be useful, unless the explosion radius is huge. We can actually see Brimstone's effect in this clip. The enemy explodes, and the radius isn't too bad, but I'd like to get some damage numbers. You need to kill them with Scorch, not just a melee attack, and they need to be in range of a bunch of other enemies at the same time. Solar Wind just feels like the best pick overall for defensive purposes, but I can definitely see Brimstone's occasional usefulness. It really all depends on a lot of things. It's a very situational skill, whereas Solar Wind, while technically still situational, will get much more consistent usage in its effect. Brimstone as a PvP skill is the same thing, very situational. You have your passive stats now, Arcane Tree and Order Tree. These are going to be up to you most of the time. I personally like a balance of stats, weighing in on the side of armor and recovery more than agility. So Arcane Wisdom and Divine Order gives a decent mix of everything, plus if you lock in you get even more recovery. First passive ability bonus tree consists of Radiant Will, Viking Funeral, and Sunburst. Radiant Will, pretty simple, extends the duration of Radiance. Viking Funeral boosts your ignite damage and makes your enemies burn for longer, and Sunburst gives Scorch a chance to grant Orbs of Light when you get a kill. Just covered what I thought about skills that involve killing with your activated melee skill. It's really going to depend on how often you generate orbs and how many orbs you actually make when you do generate them. I can see it being pretty useful if you're running a strength build and it generates orbs more often than it doesn't, but chance to and need to kill skills are always going to be iffy with me. Radiant Will is going to be a staple for group play, provided that you chose Song of Flame, which you should have, and I can also see it being useful with Radiant Skin depending on the damage reduction. Viking Funeral is going to be the obvious choice for solo or DPS focused Sunsingers, definitely very useful for PvP as well, but Sunburst, the verdict is still out on that one. Second passive ability bonus tree consists of Touch of Flame, Angel of Light, and Gift of the Sun. Touch of Flame makes all grenades ignite enemies, Angel of Light freezes you in the air if you aim your weapon while airborne, and Gift of the Sun gives you another grenade. Touch of Flame meshes really nicely with stuff like Viking Funeral and even Firebolt Grenade depending on how far the bolts can fly out. You can really spread the damage around like that. I'd even say staple it with Viking Funeral. Also, I'm guessing someone is going to be wondering about the wording of all grenades. I assume this means all of your grenades and not your entire party. Angel of Light is an interesting choice for PvE since AI isn't as smart as real people, but I think it's actually going to end up being a terrible choice for PvP. You are so incredibly exposed in the air, and still, being in the air, sure, you can shoot down for a short time accurately, since I know shooting in the air is kind of weird right now, but it just seems like a terrible choice, suspending yourself in mid-air for everyone to just see and shoot you. You're going to become an instant target. Gift of the Sun works very well with the Discipline build and use of Radiance. Being able to spam your grenades everywhere in PvP is going to be super annoying to deal with, and it definitely has some PvE uses as well. Sunsinger seems to be less of a support role like we all first thought, and more of a DPS role, although it definitely can be played as a support role if you pick all of these support-based talents, so that's Song of Flame and either Radiant Will or Sunburst. However, the Sunsinger is a great solar damage subclass, and can be spec'd to really pump out the solar damage a lot with the benefits of Radiance. My only concern is the grenade. The Hunter's Incendiary Grenade, which dealt solar damage and then additional solar damage over time, the dot really didn't do that much damage, and if Sunsinger grenades are on pace to do similar damage, then we might run into a couple of issues. Anyway, that is the Sunsinger in depth. Tune in tomorrow for the next video, which will be on the Defender Titan. Monday will be the Bladedancer Hunter, and then either Tuesday or Wednesday should be the big